I stopped the wedding. Not because I wanted to, because my son asked me to. He didn't say it out loud. He couldn't. But when he pulled me into that hug in the hallway outside the chapel, the kind of hug that lasts a second too long, I felt him press something into the side pocket of my blazer. A folded piece of paper, small enough to hide in a palm. I didn't look at it until I sat back down in the front pew. I smoothed it open on my knee, kept my eyes forward, and read it without moving my head. Mom, she's not who she told me. Please don't let this happen. I need you. I folded it back. I set my hands in my lap. The organ was already playing. I had exactly 11 minutes to figure out what to do. Let me back up, because none of this started at the wedding. It started 2 years before that, on a Tuesday in October, when my son called to tell me he'd met someone. My name is Nora. I'm 63 years old. I live in Harpswell, Maine, in a house my late husband and I built together over the course of about 15 years, adding a room here, a porch there, until it became the kind of place that holds a family's whole history in its walls. My husband, Ray, passed 6 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, no warning. One morning he was making coffee and reading the tide charts, and by noon he was gone. I won't pretend the years after that were easy. They weren't. But I had my work. I'd spent 31 years as a school librarian, and even after I retired, I kept busy with the Historical Society, with my garden, with the rotation of neighbors who seemed to understand that a widow living alone on a peninsula needs people checking in. I had my son, and I had the house. The house matters to this story, so I'll tell you about it plainly. It sits on 2.5 acres at the edge of a saltwater cove. Ray bought the land in 1987 for almost nothing because nobody wanted property that far down a dirt road. We were young and we thought we were being clever. Turns out we were. By the time Ray died, the land alone was appraised at well over $1 million. There's also what Ray left in savings and investments, careful, steady accumulation over 40 years of modest living. I am not a wealthy woman in the way that word usually gets used. I don't take vacations. I drive a 10-year-old Subaru. But on paper, if you looked at the assets, the number would surprise you. My son, I'll call him my son because that's who he is, and his name is his own, is 31. He works as a marine biologist up at the research station in Booth Bay. He's quiet, careful, the kind of person who reads instruction manuals and means it. He was not the sort to fall fast or hard. So when he called me that October and said he'd met someone, I listened closely. Her name was Fiona. She was 28, worked in real estate development out of Portland, had grown up in New Hampshire. He'd met her at a conference. She was smart, he said, driven, knew exactly what she wanted. I noted that last part. I met her for the first time at Thanksgiving, 6 weeks after that phone call. She was striking, dark hair, direct eye contact, the kind of woman who fills a room without seeming to try. She brought wine and a pie she'd made herself, and she complimented everything I'd done with the house in a way that felt genuinely observant rather than polite. "The way you've used the natural light in here," she said, standing in the kitchen doorway, looking out toward the cove. "Did you orient the addition yourself, or did you work with an architect?" My husband had strong opinions about east-facing windows, I said. Smart man. She turned and smiled at me. This place must be worth something extraordinary now. I smiled back. I said, yes, I suppose it must be. It was such a natural thing to say, such a reasonable observation. I filed it away and didn't think about it again. Not then. She and my son got serious quickly. By spring, they were living together in Portland. By the following fall, he was talking about rings. I was happy for him. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely, wholeheartedly happy. He seemed lighter around her. He laughed more. She seemed to make him feel capable of things he'd been timid about before. But there were moments. The second time I had them both for a weekend, Fiona asked if she could walk the property line with me. She wanted to understand where my land ended and the conservation easement began. I thought it was an odd request. Most people just want to see the view. But I walked her through it. She asked about the deed, about whether the easement was attached to the property permanently or could be dissolved, about what the process would be if someone wanted to develop the back parcel. "Are you thinking about real estate up here?" I asked. "Oh, just curious," she said. "Professional have it." The third visit, she mentioned, in passing, that she'd looked at my property tax records. "I was doing research on coastal Maine properties for a client," she explained. "Your address came up." "I hope that's not weird." I said it wasn't. I made my face say it wasn't. But I thought about it that night, alone in my kitchen after they'd gone to bed. I thought about the questions in sequence: the land, the easement, the deed, the taxes, and I understood that I was looking at a pattern, even if I couldn't yet see the whole shape of it. I didn't say anything to my son. I had no evidence. I had only a feeling, and mothers learn early that feelings voiced too soon become the story rather than the thing the story is about. In January, my son called and said Fiona had been asking about my estate planning. Had I updated my will since Ray died? Did I have a trust set up? Were there beneficiaries named on my investment accounts? "She mentioned it," he said, a little carefully, "because she has clients who've had complications when a parent passes and things aren't organized. She just thought it might be worth thinking about." "That's very thoughtful of her," I said. After we hung up, I sat for a long time looking out at the cove. Then I called my attorney, a woman named, well, it doesn't matter what her name is. She's been my attorney for 20 years. I told her I wanted to make sure everything was locked down tight. I transferred all original documents, deed, will, investment account paperwork, into a secure arrangement she managed. I made it so that nothing about my property could be changed, transferred, or encumbered without my attorney's involvement and a waiting period. It was a quiet thing I did on the Thursday afternoon, and I told no one. That spring, Fiona asked me directly whether I'd considered adding my son to the deed. "Just in case something happens," she said, "it would simplify everything." "I've got it all organized with my attorney," I told her. Something shifted in her face. Fast, the kind of micro-expression that's gone before you can name it. Then a smile came back. "Of course," she said. "That's the smart way to do it." I excused myself to check on dinner and stood at the stove for a moment with my back to her, breathing slowly. The engagement happened in June. He called me first, which is how I knew it was real to him. He always calls me first for the things that matter. He was so happy. I told him I was happy too, and I meant it. I meant the part about him. I was less certain about the rest. I started paying closer attention. I noticed that Fiona had started calling my doctor's office. My son mentioned it once, casually. "Fiona tried to reach Dr. Halverson's office about your last blood work, just to make sure you had someone following up since you live alone." My doctor's office, to their credit, did not release any information, but they called me to let me know someone had inquired. I called my doctor that afternoon and added a note to my file. I also started keeping a log. Nothing dramatic, just dates, what was said, who was present. A spiral notebook I kept in my bedside drawer. In August, my son's future mother-in-law visited from New Hampshire. We had a pleasant lunch, and afterward she said something I've thought about many times since. She took my hand and said, "Fiona is a determined girl. She always has been." She didn't have much growing up, and she decided very young that she would never feel that way again. She said it warmly, proudly even. But she was watching my face when she said it. I think she was trying to tell me something without saying it. 3 weeks before the wedding, I drove down to Portland on the pretext of dropping off a gift, some things from Ray's study that my son had asked for. Fiona was at work. My son and I sat in his kitchen and drank coffee, and I watched him in the way you watch someone you love when you're trying to understand if they're happy or if they've simply gotten very good at pretending. "Are you sure?" I said. Just that. He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across his face. Not doubt, exactly. More like a person who's been holding a question they haven't had permission to say out loud. "She gets anxious about security," he said finally. "About having things locked in. I think it's from her childhood. I know she's asked you some things that might have seemed forward." "She called my doctor," I said. He set his mug down. "I didn't know that," he said. "I know you didn't." We sat with that for a minute. I love her, he said. I know you do. I drove back to Harpswell that afternoon without saying what I was really thinking, because what I was really thinking was this: you can love someone and still not know them. And sometimes the last person to see clearly is the one standing closest. The wedding was set for a Saturday in September at a small inn on the coast outside of Portland. 90 guests, afternoon ceremony, dinner and dancing after. My son had been so careful about the details, the flowers, the music, the seating arrangement that would keep two of Fiona's cousins separated by at least 3 tables. He'd thrown himself into planning it the way he threw himself into everything, methodically, earnestly, with his whole heart. The morning of the wedding, I got dressed in the blue suit I'd bought for the occasion and drove down to the inn. I arrived 2 hours early because I am that kind of mother. I helped arrange centerpieces. I checked on the caterer. I found my son in the small room off the chapel that the groom's party was using, and he looked so much like his father standing there in his good suit that my chest ached. He hugged me. Long, tight. That hug that lasted a second too long, and I felt the paper go into my pocket. I walked back to the chapel and sat in the front pew and read it. Mom, she's not who she told me. Please don't let this happen. I need you. 8 sentences. No, 8 words. I counted them twice. I had 11 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. I thought about what I know. I thought about the notebook in my bedside drawer. I thought about my attorney. I thought about the micro-expression that had crossed Fiona's face when I told her my documents were organized. And I thought about what my son had just done. Not panicking, not running, but choosing to trust the one person he knew would know what to do and do it quietly. I stood up. I walked out the side door of the chapel. I found the inn's manager and asked to use a private phone. I called my attorney first. She picked up on the second ring. It was a Saturday, but she has always picked up. I told her what was happening in as few words as possible. Don't let the ceremony proceed until you hear back from me, she said. Give me 20 minutes. I said I only had 11. Then stall, she said. I went back inside. I found the officiant, a young man with a boutonniere and a nervous smile, and I told him there was a small family matter that needed 5 minutes before we could begin. He looked uncertain. I looked at him in the way that 63 years of quiet authority can make a person look, and he nodded and went to speak to the organist. I sat back down. I folded my hands. I breathed. What my attorney found in 19 minutes, she beat her own estimate. Was this Fiona had, 2 months prior, filed paperwork with the county attempting to establish my son as a co-owner of my property based on a document that purported to be my signature. The document was not my signature. My attorney had already flagged an anomaly in the public filings, but hadn't connected it to anything until that moment. There was also, and this came later, in the days after, a pattern of financial inquiries that she had made using my son's information. Credit checks run in his name against assets that were listed as belonging to his household, assets that were not yet his, assets that could only be his if something happened to me and the will was structured a certain way. She had been, methodically and carefully, building a version of their life on a foundation she hadn't built and didn't own. When my attorney called me back, she had already been in contact with the county recorder's office and with a detective she knew. There would be no dramatic announcement. There would be no scene in front of 90 guests. That was never going to be how this ended. Not if I could help it. 2 police officers arrived at the inn 17 minutes after the ceremony was supposed to start. They spoke with Fiona in the manager's office. I don't know exactly what was said. I know that she did not come back out. My son walked out of the groom's room when he saw the officers come in, and he looked at me across the hallway with an expression I don't have a word for. It was not relief, exactly. It was something more complicated. The face of a person who has been carrying a weight they didn't have the language to name, finally being allowed to set it down. I walked to him and put my hand on his arm and said, "I know." He nodded. That was all. The guests were told there was a family emergency, that the wedding would be postponed. Most people assumed illness, someone's health, a sudden complication. The inn was kind and efficient about it. People filed out quietly in the way that people do when they sense something private is happening and they have enough grace not to press. I drove my son back to Harpswell that night. He sat in the passenger seat the way he used to as a little boy, quiet, watching the road, occasionally looking out at the dark water when we got close to the coast. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say that couldn't wait. He stayed for a week. In that week, I learned some of what he'd known. He'd found documents on her laptop, accidentally, looking for a charger cable, 2 months before the wedding. He'd confronted her. She'd cried, explained it as just research, as anxiety, as her history with financial insecurity making her do things that looked worse than they were. He'd wanted to believe her. He'd tried. But something in him hadn't been able to settle back into certainty, and that uncertainty had sat in him for 2 months like a stone, getting heavier every day. He'd written the note 3 weeks before the wedding. He carried it in his wallet until the morning of, because he hadn't decided yet whether to use it. "What made you decide?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "She asked me the night before whether I'd had a chance to talk to you about the deed. The night before our wedding." He looked at me. That's when I knew. The legal process took several months. Fiona was charged with forgery and fraud. Her attorney negotiated a plea that kept her out of prison but resulted in a conviction and restitution. My son had to untangle his finances carefully. There were credit inquiries he hadn't authorized, small accounts opened in patterns that took time to unravel. He's okay now. He's more than okay, I think. There's a clarity to him that I hadn't seen in 2 years, like something that had been slightly out of focus has finally sharpened. He's back in Boothbay. He got a promotion at the research station. He came for Christmas, and we made Ray's old chili recipe and walked the property line in the snow, the 2 of us. And he didn't ask about easements or deeds or appraisals. He just looked at the cove and said it was beautiful. It is beautiful. It's always been beautiful. There are things I've turned over many times since all of this ended, whether I could have moved sooner, whether saying something earlier, naming the pattern when it was still forming, might have saved my son 2 years of a relationship that was costing him something he couldn't afford to lose. I don't know. You never know. The instinct to protect a child from a truth they're not ready to hear is powerful, and it doesn't go away just because they're grown. What I do know is this: when it mattered, he trusted me. He pressed a folded piece of paper into my pocket and trusted me to know what to do. That is not a small thing. That is everything. I've kept the note. It's in the spiral notebook in my bedside drawer, tucked between the last page of entries and the back cover. I don't look at it often, but I know it's there. Some nights, when the tide is high and the sound of the water carries up to the house, I think about what Ray would have made of all of it. He would have been furious at first. He had a strong sense of justice and very little patience for people who preyed on others' trust. But I think in the end, he would have focused on the part that mattered. That our son knew who to call. That the house is still standing. That the cove is still ours. That we're still okay. That's the part I keep coming back to. In all the noise and the paperwork and the long, careful months of untangling, through all of it, we were okay. And when I sit on the porch in the evening and watch the light go off the water, the way Ray always loved to watch it, I feel something that isn't quite peace, but is close enough. Close enough is something. At 63, with Saltaire coming in off the cove and my son's number in my phone and my deed locked safe in my attorney's files, close enough is more than I need.